Get started. My name is Rita Chambliss. I'm Vice Chair of the Transportation Committee, and I'll be convening this meeting in the absence of our Chair, Deb Barber. Today's meeting date is March 11th, 2024, and we're starting at 4 o'clock. The first item on our agenda is approval of the agenda, which we don't have anything to approve unless there are opposition, and it doesn't look like there is any. So we'll go ahead and consider the agenda approved. Next, I will ask for a motion to approve the February 26th, 2024 Transportation Committee meetings. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded by Morales and Vento. Thank you so much. Is there any discussion? With no discussion on the minutes, then all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Nay? Then the committee minutes have passed. Next, we have reports for MTS Executive Director.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, council members. Just one short report tonight, and that is that the federal government remains open for business. Last Friday, Congress approved full-year appropriations for 6 program areas, including for housing and for transportation. The President signed this into law over the weekend, and with this action, these areas of the government are funded through September of 2024. So the bill provides around $106 billion in funding for the US DOT, which will include the RAISE grant program at around $2 billion, FAA staffing, $63 billion for highways and bridges, $17 billion for transit between formula and discretionary programs, amongst all the other programs of the US DOT. Notably, the bill also included congressionally directed spending for members' priority projects. This included funds for some highway projects and other projects around the region, but specifically to the council, spending direction from Senators Klobuchar and Smith and Congressman Phillips will provide $5 million to the council for Metromobility small bus replacement. So we're grateful for these funds, and it'll help us shore up our 2024 small bus purchase that will be coming to a future meeting in the council for approval later this year. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Well, that sounds like very good news to me. Are there any questions? No questions? Thank you, Director Carlson. Next, we'll have a report from the Metro Transit General Manager, Leslie.
Right, Madam Chair, council members, for Metro Transit today, my report is just a couple reminders of upcoming dates. This Saturday, March 16th, the quarterly service changes will go into effect. We've been communicating those to riders for several weeks now, and you received an information item on that last month, but looking forward to those changes. Also on March 16th is our day to recognize St. Patrick's Day, which happens on the 17th. But on the 16th, we'll continue our long-running promotion with Miller Tours to offer free rides system-wide starting at 6 p.m. until end of service that night. So it provides a safe way home for people who might be out celebrating, and we're also able to offer a couple extra light rail trips to take us past midnight on those nights too for people who might be out a bit later than we usually run. And then finally, on March 18th, a week from today, is Transit Employee Appreciation Day. And I know your community relations specialists have shared information about how you can sign up or indicate interest in joining us next Monday to help recognize our transit employees. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions? No questions. Thank you for that report. I'm glad that we have that St. Pat's Day support. And I'm looking forward to participating in at least one Employee Appreciation Day event on Monday. It looks like we do not have anyone here from the Transportation Accessibility Advisory Committee, so we'll catch up with them next time. Next on our agenda is the consent business, and as you can see, there are no items on the consent agenda, so we'll just move on to the non-consent business. The first item on non-consent is 2024-23, contract 22P305 and 22P372, Hoglund Bus Amendment Number 1, and we'll have a report from Paul Colton.
Thank you, Chair, committee members. This afternoon, I do have for you this amendment for our contract with Hoglund Bus. And the action that I am recommending is that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to execute amendments to 1, contract 22P 305 with Hoglund Bus for a price increase of $376,700 for a cumulative not to exceed amount of $1,746,600. And with contract number 2 with Hoglund Bus, which is contract 22P 372 with Hoglund Bus for a price increase of $905,142 for a cumulative not to exceed amount of $4,014,178. One of the challenges we still have in the small bus production is that you can see we got approval from all of you back in 2022 for this contract using the state of Minnesota contract, and we'll be going to build in May. During that time, the manufacturer had a price increase due to increases in their materials, supplies, and labor, and went to a new pricing book which they passed on to all their vendors. So for right now, we are working with MnDOT, who is going through the amendment process with our vendors for this approved increase in pricing to allow us to continue to move forward with our buses and our bus purchases. This increase is less than we anticipated. We were anticipating about a $15,000 higher increase in pricing. So some of the supply chain issues, the pricing, the inflation has come down a little bit, and so it appears to be stabilizing, and that's what people in the marketplace are telling me as well. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions related to this item.
Are there any questions? Well, I'm glad that we've got a drop in inflation. That's good news. If there aren't any further questions, I will ask for a motion to approve 2024-23 contract 22P305 and 22P372 Hoglund with the amendments. Is there a motion?
Make a motion.
The motion has been made by Carter and seconded by Morales. Any discussion? Without any discussion, I'll ask for all in favor.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. That motion carries. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our next consent item, again with Mr. Colton, is 2024-24 contract 22P373 for North Central Bus Amendment Number 1.
Thank you. Similarly to our previous amendment, this one is also for bus price increases off of the same 2022 contract with North Central. And we propose the following action: that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to execute amendment number 1 to contract 22P373 with North Central Bus to increase the number of buses purchased from 75 to 104 at a price increase of $6,162,373 for a cumulative not to exceed contract amount of $14,531,763. This one is slightly different than the other one in that we had an opportunity to jump into the 22 pricing before the window closed, and we were able to get more chassis and buses built on this contract. So 29 additional buses that we're going to be building on this contract, saving approximately $15,000 per bus per those extra 29 buses, and we would have paid on the 2023 contract. So we feel pretty good about that, being able to save that kind of money given all the inflationary issues. This too is the same. The other issue is the same as the other one. Content, pricing, labor pricing, all increasing over that long period of time between the contract pricing originally and moving into future years before the buses are ever built. And so there was a change in the pricing book from the manufacturer. And with that, I would be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions? No questions, then I will ask for a motion to approve that 2024-24 amendment number 1.
So moved.
Moved by Vento and seconded by Tyrone Carter. Any discussion? Oh, I'm sorry, Diego Morales was the person that seconded. I looked too quickly. Okay, any discussion? With no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Nay? None opposed, so that motion carries. Thank you so much.
Thank you, committee.
Our next item on non-consent is 2024-67, Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport 2040 Long-Term Comprehensive Plan with Joe Whiting presenting.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and council members. Thank you for getting my last name correct. That's not one that everyone does, so appreciate it. So my name is Joe Whiting. I'll be presenting this 2040 long-term comprehensive plan. We also have MAC staff on hand too if there's any detailed questions that arise after this presentation. First, we like to look at Met Council's role in aviation. So it's really defined in state statute, and it's not something that's federally mandated. It's identified in state statute 473165 and 611 for the Met Council to review and determine any consistency and conformance of airport long-term comprehensive plans as required by the MAC to produce at periodically scheduled intervals. And a long-term comprehensive plan at the airport level includes a 20-year forecast demand outline, includes, it can periodically updated as identified in the transportation policy plan, and to identify any needed projects or operational parameters to meet those forecast demands, and to also it would be utilized as a basic input of both the transportation policy plan and also local comprehensive plans for communities which surround the airport. Brief overview of the airport itself. So it's identified as a major hub airport and the major commercial service airport for both the state and the upper Midwest region. The planning process actually began in 2019 prior to the pandemic, and so as you can see here, there's two kind of baseline numbers used for flight activity at the airport, and so that baseline of 2018 is when the planning process began. Just to kind of show context here of what the pandemic actually did to air service in the industry in general, as you can see, from about 407,000 operations in 2018 to about 246,000 in 2020. So a pretty significant impact from those COVID pandemic era years. Also included here are some high-level plan objectives that the MAC utilized in their planning process to ensure that the plan both met community needs and airport needs moving forward. As I mentioned, one of those big aspects of a long-term comprehensive plan is the activity forecasts, and as I mentioned in the last slide, that those forecasts had to be revised to incorporate the impact of the pandemic. For the most part, the impact of the pandemic is mostly for that near term. The airport is nearly back to where it was at pre-pandemic levels, but not quite there yet, still recovering. However, these do not impact generally their long-term estimates for activity demands that you can see here. By 2040, they're anticipating about 28 million enplanements, which are passenger boardings. They're anticipating about 400,000 tons of cargo moved to the airport by 2040, and also about 510,000 operations. And operations are aircraft landing and taking off the airport. Just one thing to note here, we'll be looking at record flight activity in passenger boardings. However, we will not be actually reaching that historical high of 540,000 operations that you see at the airport actually in 2005. So we'll be moving record passengers and cargo, but in not record amount of flights. And so it's something that's important here, as this really does dictate then the next area we look at here, which are planned improvements to meet that demand. So another big aspect here is kind of conceptually identifying what potential improvements could be done at the airfield to meet that forecast demand. And how the MAC did is they split it up into two different ways here, both landside and airside facilities. So landside facilities are kind of your parking facilities, your curbside ramps, your terminals before security, those kind of facilities, and your airside are then your gates, your runways, your taxiways, and those things that support the aircraft operations on the airfield itself. Also, they split these conceptual improvements into different terms of timing. So there's near term, 1 to 5 years, that mid-term, 6 to 10 years, and that long term, 10 plus years. And just outlining a few larger projects here to anticipate the airport through this plan. One of them is a Terminal 2 expansion to the south. As you can see on the bottom of this image here, there's about an 11-gate expansion that will be planned in that near term, so 1 to 5 years. Additionally, that USPS redevelopment, so that's at Terminal 1, so that's the old US Postal Service facility. They're still there today, however, anticipated that their use will be phased out and moved to other facilities on the airport. That'll be redeveloped likely into parking facilities. And finally, an expansion of the orange ramp at Terminal 2, which will provide additional parking capacity and also potentially have some impacts on the LRT platform, potentially improvements of that as well that could go along with that project. Looking at the midterm, so again, that's at 6 to 10 years. Some of these larger projects outlined here, there'd be looking for a cargo facility expansion on the west side of the airfield, so that'd be getting access off of Trunk Highway 77. A reconstruction of the Trunk Highway 5 Post Road interchange, which would improve access to Terminal 2 as it kind of gets expanded and its capacity gets enhanced. And finally, something known as a fixed base operator, so that's the operator that runs private jets, air taxi services, general aviation at the airport, looking to move that facility to the north side of the airfield and get access from Trunk Highway 62 rather than where it is today on the south side of the airfield. Look at the longer term projects here, so again, that's 10 plus years out. And I'm looking at an additional final expansion of Terminal 2 to expand its total gate capacity to 35 from an existing 16 today. Also, another large project in the long term is a potential airside connection between terminals. So that would be behind security, which would really allow the terminals a lot more flexibility and connectivity for passengers kind of boarding in and out of the airport. They can move between the two terminals without having to leave security and come back. So big projects here. Again, these are long-term projects, so probably not something we'll see in a little bit here, but just something to note as we look forward to what we expect of the airport in the future. Tied to this, another big aspect of these long-term comprehensive plans is modeling potential noise impacts. So the MAC does an annual assessment of noise impacts and creates these what they're called contours to kind of assess where the greatest impacts of noise are in those adjacent communities. Part of this planning process is to help model that to 2040 in order for local adjacent communities to then plan their land use planning around potentially these future impacts as well. That's included here. As you can see here, there's a general expansion of the existing noise contours because of that increased activity. However, it's not a significant expansion. It's also kind of expanding as you'd expect as those more aircraft flight impacts continue on. Those kind of expand out a little bit on the longer side on the end of those runways there. Again, these are conceptual, so every year MAC does take these actual impacts, and this is more just a planning level idea to help local communities plan for the local land use in the future. Also, another big aspect of these long-term comprehensive plans is the environmental considerations. So environmental impacts are included in this plan, however, they're not studied in depth because of the conceptual nature of the projects and the lack of major airfield investments going to be seen through this project. These environmental impacts will be something that will be covered in the follow-up environmental review of this plan. So once this plan goes to the MAC board and it's adopted, then move on to the next phase, which is the environmental assessment phase, which includes continued working with council staff and the FAA and other state partners as well to kind of assess any potential environmental impacts from any of the improvements outlined in the plan. Connected to that though, MAC does have pretty ambitious sustainability targets set for the airport. So some of these targets are looking by 2030 to reduce the airport facilities GHG emissions by 80%, reduce water use per passenger by 15%, and also divert 75% of all solid waste away from landfills. Connect to that as well, Delta is the major operator at the airport and also has set their own sustainability targets as seen in the slide here. So Delta actually recently announced a partnership with Greater MSP, the economic development arm of the region, to establish MSP as a sustainable aviation fuel hub. What that really means is instead of using traditional jet fuel, they'll be switching over to more of a blended biofuel potentially in the future, sourcing local uses from our local environment here in the area. What Delta's really planning on doing is have up to 35% to 50% of MSP of their airplanes using sustainable aviation fuel, which could cut GHG emissions at the airplane level by 80% by 2035. So pretty ambitious uptake of sustainable aviation fuels. And connect to that as well, Delta is also planning on electrifying their kind of airfield fleet, those little tugs and those little things that run around the airport and move your baggage around. They're looking to have 50% of those vehicles electrified by 2025, so next year, and then eventually 100% of those vehicles will be electrified on the campus as well, kind of reducing those GHG impacts from the airfield itself. One of the main objectives of this plan was to conduct a very robust public engagement, and they really did meet that objective in this planning process. So this was a long planning process, again, started in 2019 and didn't finish until last year. So they had 4 years to really get quite a bit of engagement in the public and various communities around the airport. Total about 27 total public meetings from 2019 to 2023, including 4 general public events, multiple meetings with a stakeholder advisory committee created to review this plan or help drive this plan, and also including informational updates, City of Minneapolis, the Metropolitan Council. Another major aspect of this as well was the public comment period, which they held for 60 days last summer between June and August. That included about 139 public comments through that process as well that the MAC has addressed in their plan as well. Connecting this to regional policy real quick, so this plan, again, it needs to conform to that transportation policy plan, the regional system plan, and also then be consistent with the regional development guide. And so through this planning process, this plan really does meet those objectives through the transportation policy plan. This is a basic input of the transportation policy plan and help to inform the aviation chapter. The airport is listed as the major airport of the region, and that will not change with this plan. Again, there's very limited airside improvements, those airfield improvements, and those improvements are generally focused on those terminal capacity and meeting those future demand levels of aircraft. Looking at the regional development guide side, so that's Thrive 2040. This plan really does go to meet those consistent, compatible local comprehensive plans, similar to the city comprehensive plans. The airports need to complete these for those future planning activities and ensure those consistencies and compatibilities. And also, it really meets that prosperity objective of Thrive 2040. MSP is one of the largest concentrations of employment in the state, up to 20,000 people on the campus at any one day. And so really looking to improve and maximize the efficiency of our facilities really does help improve that regional competitiveness of MSP. And I do believe, maybe I should mention this, they did win another award, I think, for the best airport yesterday, I believe, right? Yeah, so they're doing a good job. Looking forward, so after we review these plans for consistent determination at the MAC Council. We'll be moving on to the MAC Board to adopt the plan. Following that, again, as I mentioned, we'll be moving on to that environmental assessment phase where we'll assess those impacts from these preferred alternative conceptual projects. After that process, then the FAA will approve that environmental document, improve that airport layout plan, and then moving on to the CIP. And so there'll be multiple opportunities to continue to engage with the MAC on this plan and to review these potential projects as they move through the system. And just something to note here is in the CIP, the MAC is also is something that the council approved as well, came through a couple months ago. And so this is something, a continual planning process that we'll be able to review and provide input on throughout the entire life of this plan. Therefore, at the end of this presentation here, the requested action here today is to find that the Metropolitan Council finds that the final draft 2040 long-term comprehensive plan both has a multi-city impact and also it conforms to the transportation policy plan and is consistent with the regional development guide of the region. And with that, I will take any questions. Again, we do have some MAC staff here if there's any more detailed questions anyone has.
Well, thank you. It's always nice to have updates from the MAC and seeing the short-term, midterm, and long-term plan. Very interesting knowing that we have aggressive goals for the environment and going with EV vehicles. I didn't know that Greater MSP was involved with the planning, so that's great to know. I'll have to look more into what they're up to these days. And congratulations to the MAC on your recently received award. Are there any questions? Councilmember Vento.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have one quick question, and if you don't have an answer today, that's fine, you can follow up. When the Legislative Task Force on Metropolitan Governance was holding public hearings, at one of the public hearings there was a fair amount of concern expressed about one of the regional airports, and I'm wondering what extent the public engagement that MAC had included the regional airports and the folks that live in the vicinity or work in the vicinity of those airports. Everybody happens to know. For me, when I think of the airport, I think of going west a few miles. When I think of the airport, I think of that airport, and I'm not thinking of the regional ones. But I wasn't surprised when I heard the concern expressed, and this is not intended to be a criticism, it's just an inquiry, and if it hasn't been happening, I hope that we can do some engagement with them.
Yeah. Madam Chair, members, first, my name is Eric Gillis, Senior Airport Planner with the MAC. I oversee the planning at MSP, but also our 6 reliever airports. And if I understand your question correctly, and if not, please feel free to follow up. The long-term plan for MSP does not specifically look at planning for the reliever airports. We have separate long-term plan efforts for each of the reliever airports and MSP separately.
Got it.
And I'd follow up with that. So as these other reliever airports go through these planning process, they will also include a robust engagement period as well. The next one you'll be seeing is potentially Flying Cloud in the next year or two. So these kind of routinely kind of go through this process, and so once those other airports come up, we can kind of kick off that review process of this long-term plan as well. So each one will get their love when their time comes. So.
Madam Chair, if I could, thank you, I'm glad to hear that. I'm not surprised to hear it, but I just wanted to make sure so that when I get questions about it, I can respond, that folks need to get involved in that public engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, good question, and thank you for the response. Any other questions? No other questions, thank you for that presentation. So I'll ask for council members to review the requested action for the Met Council to find that the final draft MSP International Airport 2040 Long-Term Comprehensive Plan has a multi-city impact as well as conforms to the council systems and is consistent with council policies. Is there a motion?
So moved.
It's been moved by Councilmember Diego Morales. A second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Vento. Any discussion further? With no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, nay. That motion carries. Thank you so much. Next, we have the 2024-15 JT 2024 budget amendment carry forward for first quarter with Ed Petrie and Heather Giesel.
Good afternoon, Chair, Committee members. Ed Petrie, Director of Finance, Metro Transit.
Chair, Committee members, Heather Giesel, Director of Finance and Administration for CD and MTS.
And Chair, Committee members, I will start off. I'll go through the Metro Transit portion of the amendment, which will include a number of changes to our proposed changes to our capital program and changes to our operating program. Answer questions, and I'll then turn it over to Heather for her portion of it. So once again, this amendment is to amend the 2024 Unified Budget Amendment. It's our carry forward first quarter budget amendment. It's a combined amendment. It includes both changes to both capital and the operating budget. This is one of our larger amendments this year, which will include a lot of projects. The money is now available. We're bringing the projects forward. I will then let you also know our next amendment will also be a large amendment. Also, the fact is that we just received our first 5/12 of the federal apportionment last week. We're going to start beginning working on federal grants. So then the amendment that we come forward the second quarter in June, we'll start bringing those federal funds in with that amendment. I will start going through the capital piece for Metro Transit. We have a number of projects that we're closing and are reallocating the projects. That's standard within our normal process, but I'll focus mainly on the authorizing the new projects this evening. As I made a comment, that the funding has now become available, so now we're recommending moving those projects from the CIP into the capital budget, so we can then begin the projects, begin the construction, ordering items, ordering buses, etc. Overall with Metro Transit, we are adjusting 46 projects with this amendment, so it is one of our larger amendments. It includes, first of all, the Green Line extension. We're bringing in $100 million in Hennepin County funding via an amended capital grant agreement that was approved by the council with business item 2024-14. We're also recognizing $27.8 million in federal fiscal year 23 CIG section 165, federal funding for the Green Line. We have a number of state of good repair projects for the LRT. We have $7.1 million for special track work replacements, just over $24 million for LRT Phase 3 track replacement. That's at Terminal 2 and Cedar Riverside. We also have $3 million in Lake Street station renovations. Another big project is we're recognizing $8.9 million of funds for the material management storage facility for the purchase and design of a bus maintenance on revenue shop, which coincides with the needed support that we need to support our growth of our bus system in the future. We have $23.7 million for the purchase of expansion buses to be delivered in 2025 to be used on BRT services or BRT lines that are in service. And also $3 million to match other low, no, and low emission grants for buses. We have $8.9 million for the G line for project development and engineering. And then we also have a number of state of good repair projects for both bus and rail. That includes $4.5 million for the East Metro parking deck replacement. We have a number of projects for security systems, squad cameras, and camera trailers. Public facility refurbishment and improvements. We have support facility improvements, support vehicles and equipment, variable message signs, overhaul base exterior building repairs, and HVAC units and boilers, a lot of state of good repair for our support facilities. The overall change for Metro Transit is federal fund or total funds of just over $220 million. That's made up of $26 million in federal funds, just over $9 million in state money. The $100 million, as I discussed, were coming from Hennepin County. $14 million in regional transit capital and $70 million in sales tax funds. On the operating side, we have a number of adjustments for Metro Transit. First of all, we're recognizing $250,000, which is from the 2021 Omnibus Transportation Bill for transit service improvements on Trunk Highway 55. That's $250,000. We have just over $1.8 million for the Transit Service Intervention Project for the 2023 state legislature. This would be for intervention teams, labor, and other expenses. Where we have an adjustment for both bus, light rail, and commuter rail for adjusting salaries, wages, and benefits for anticipated budget increases for 2024. We have an increase of just over $3.1 million for interdivisional cost allocations from regional allocation to Metro Transit. This would be for additional staff in human resources, IS, and legal. And then on the adjustment or on the FTE side for Metro Transit, we have an adjustment of our FTEs of 212 FTEs for 2024. The biggest piece of this would include 130 bus operators. When we set our bus service plan last year, we set our bus service plan based upon what we thought staffing would be available and match the service with that. We've had luck as we've been talking to you over the last few months or the last couple of quarters. We've had some very good luck with hiring of bus operators. So working with Adam Harrington and Brian Funk, we've been able to adjust our service plans. So now we're adjusting the bus operators to match what we plan for service for the balance of 24. So very good news for us, Madam Chair. That's 134 bus operators. We're also adding 33 bus FTEs and 21 rail FTEs to support the growth of the Metro Transit system, with support also focused on safety, state of good repair, and advancing actions that align with the Metro Transit area sales tax and use tax revenues. And we're also adding 24 FTEs for the TRIP program. So with that, Madam Chair, I spoke a lot. I would stand for any questions on both either the Metro Transit capital portion or the operating portion of the amendment.
Okay, very good. A lot of information, a lot of activity.
Yes.
Done by a well-run oiled machine. Any questions?
And like I said, Madam Chair, the next amendment will be one of our larger amendments also, because then we will bring in the federal funds. Like I said, we got the 512s last week. We're hoping within the next month or two, we'll get the balance of the 712s. We will then be going through the process of applying for the federal grants and then bringing those funds in.
Wonderful. Thank you for that MTS report, Metro Transit report.
Thank you.
Heather?
So transitioning over to the MTS side, I'll first start with our capital budget with the administrative section. As Ed mentioned, our budget amendments include administrative amendments. Just a reminder that these are not things to take action on, but more or less just adjustments for transparency and accounting purposes. So on the MTS side, we are repurposing 14 existing projects whose authorized capital program have already been authorized in the ACP to complete those projects. Additionally, we have 10 suburban transit provider projects that are now complete, and the remaining funds are being reallocated to their undesignated accounts for future projects. In the authorizing new project section, MTS is requesting to bring into the authorized capital program approximately $16.5 million in state, regional, and federal funds for a variety of projects that have been identified in our capital improvement plan. They include Metmo and fixed route technology replacement, Metmo small bus expansion, suburban transit provider projects, including 2 federal projects, one for the Southwest Lono grant that they were awarded, and then another one for MBTA Burnsville Bus Garage, another federal discretionary award that they were granted. You'll also see that there are 6 STP projects that we're going to be funding using the new sales tax funding. Historically, these would have been funded with RTC, but after some recent guidance from Bond Council on the use of RTC for assets that aren't on our books, we've made an adjustment here, so giving out sales tax funding to support those projects. They include a local match to the federal Lono grant to Southwest Transit, and then a number of capital projects for MBTA, including facilities, facility equipment, and non-revenue vehicles. We've also identified 13 projects that will be closed. $600,000 from those projects will be repurposed and made available for future projects. Moving on to the operating side, MTS is requesting to increase the suburban transit provider pass-through budget by approximately $17 million. $7.7 million of that is carry forward from the 2023 budget, where we had given out the microtransit grants as part of the 2023 legislative session, part of the sales tax bill. So this is just bringing forward the portion that has not been expended yet. Additionally, there is about $9.25 million that is a one-time interim distribution of regional sales tax funds to cover the period of October 1st, 2023 to December 31st, 2024, while longer-term policies are developed. So this is a one-time interim distribution to the suburban transit providers that will go out to them. Next up in Metro Mobility, we have a $12.2 million increase to service provider expenditures. This is driven primarily by higher than estimated costs for Metro Move, as well as expanded premium on-demand services, a pilot program that was required as part of the 2023 Minnesota State legislative session. Finally, in contracted services, there is a $1.5 million adjustment to the 2023 budget due to increased costs for driver barriers and driver contract rate adjustments. So the 3 main drivers that contributed to the increase in expenses were increase in contract rates and driver wages. We had been reporting on this throughout 2023. In late 2022, we had made an adjustment to contractor wage rates to align with the Metro Transit adjustment that happened. So we were really just kind of seeing this play out in 2023. There was also an increase in service on routes that had previously been suspended due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and then some driver protection barriers that were expensed in 2023 as well. So we had seen these expenses throughout 2023, reported on them in the Q2 management report, and did make an adjustment in the Q3 amendment, but didn't have a clear picture on what the expenses were going to look like until the year-end close wrapped up at the end of February. And so this has been our first chance since that was all discovered to make the adjustment. So we will be modifying the 2023 budget to correct for those expenses. Finally, MTS is requesting a transfer of just over $1.3 million in federal funds from the MTS capital program to the operating budget for an equal amount of operating dollars to be transferred from the operating budget to the capital program. This is something that we routinely do. It allows us to defederalize projects and pay for items that are not eligible to be funded with regional bonds. The dollar for dollar exchange of funds has no impact on regional MVEST allocation, MVEST reserves, or planned capital projects. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Heather, for that information. And I'm glad we were able to get those salary increases and support operator safety with those barriers and many of the other things that are so important for our services. No questions? Okay, well, thank you so much for those reports. At this point, I will ask for a motion to approve the 2024-15 JT budget amendment and carry forward for first quarter.
So moved.
It's been moved by Councilmember Tony Carter, second.
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Morales. Any discussion? With no discussion, all in favor? Opposed? Nay, that motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have 2024-45 Metro Purple Line Bus Rapid Transit Contract Amendment Number 3 to Contract 22P031 with HNTB. And we'll have Craig Lamont and Edwin Alasan to give that presentation. And one more person, it looks like.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, council members. Craig Lamont, last name pronounced La like the French pronoun and moth like the insect. I'm the Purple Line Project Manager. Preferred pronouns are he, him, his. I have two of my colleagues here this afternoon. They will be presenting the business items. I've got Edwin Awasin, who will be presenting one, and then Megan Litzy will be presenting the other one. But before we get to that, I'd like to put these two business items in context to where the Purple Line is today and where we see the Purple Line going. So on this timeline slide, we are right now in March at the far left side. We are bringing before you two business items that will help us keep moving forward. On the assumption that Purple Line wants to be in the White Bear Avenue corridor. That was the new corridor we were asked to look at about a year ago. This committee and the full council will be getting a more robust update on the project here at the end of March, more than the two slides you'll see here today. We are now to the point where we are going out for a 5-week public comment period starting today. So there's all sorts of new information on the analysis that's been done on the 4 design concepts for the White Bear Avenue corridor. We have 2 major milestones for the project anticipated this year. The first of which is a recommendation on a preferred design concept for the White Bear Avenue corridor, which would hopefully occur in that May timeframe. And then the final milestone would be a revised locally preferred alternative for the project, meaning are we sticking with the Bruce Vento Trail corridor, the project of record, or are we moving on to the White Bear Avenue corridor? I will say there is a lot of momentum and a lot of goodwill from the community and policymakers as it relates to the White Bear Avenue corridor. That's what we've been encountering for the last year since we've been asked to look at this. And so we are making the assumption that with that is the track we are likely to continue on. Obviously that decision still needs to come later this year. But on that assumption, we want to be prepared to hit the ground running. And these 2 business items here today allow us to do that. You'll hear more from Edwin and Megan on both of those items. Right now, we have the authorization within our contracts to take the White Bear Avenue corridor concept that we'll be selecting in May to 15% design, but we have no authority after that. That will be coming before you in the July timeframe as a separate business item. That business item will be preceded by a discussion of risk and risk management. Normally, this contract amendment that Edwin is going to speak to would trigger the Transitway Advancement Policy, but because we still have a lack of definition on the design of the White Bear Avenue corridor and whether or not that is going to be the project moving forward, we are recommending that we handle a discussion of risk as it relates to that policy before we bring forward this summer the larger contract amendment for our engineering contract. So you'll see that on the timeline slide as well. We will be somewhat under the gun once a decision's been made on the project to environmentally clear the project. So as you recall, we inherited this project from Ramsey County in 2021. And at that time, that was a project that was nearly 30% designed and environmentally cleared by the federal government. We will have to roll back that environmental analysis to include White Bear Avenue if that is the direction that we're given for Purple Line. So that is the context of these 2 items. I wanted to be able to provide that to you. I'd be happy to take any questions now or at the end of the presentation of the 2 business items, whichever you would prefer.
Any questions yet? I don't think so, so we can proceed.
All right. I'm going to turn it over to, I believe the first item up is the item that Edwin will be presenting.
Okay, good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Edwin Owason, last name as Wa and son as in son. So I'm the Purple Line Project, I'm the Purple Line Project Contract Manager, and my preferred pronouns are he, him, and his. I will be reading the proposed action as it is written here, that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to execute amendment number 3 to contract 22P031 with HNTV for Purple Line Bus Rapid Transit Environmental and Peer Review Services for the total contract value not to exceed $7,272,394.73. Madam Chair, committee members, permit me share a little bit about this contract. It was executed in August 2022 to HNTV for the amount of $3,646,843. Preceding this amendment, we've had two amendments. Amendment 1 was for a route modification phase 2 that increased the contract amount by $364,397.75. And this was done in July of 2023. We also had a second amendment in November of the same 2023 that was a no-cost amount amendment that was just to resume some tasks that were suspended during Amendment 1. So that was a no cost. And then that brings us to Amendment 3 today that we're talking about, which will also increase the contract by $3,261,196.75. This will bring the total contract value to that $7,272,394.93. This amendment is really to add funding and scope to be able to evaluate the alternate alignment along Maryland and White Bear in St. Paul and Maplewood. And then that will allow us to be able to compare the alternate alignment to the initial project alignment, which is the Bruce Fenton Trail. With that, there is also a sole source that accompanied this amendment, and I'd like to speak to that. In October of 2023, we presented a sole source to the Council Procurement Department for review and recommendation, which they did recommend approval. Some justifications to the sole source because the scope of work in this amendment are consistent with what is in the contract, and also will just be a continuation of the same work. Another reason for the sole source is HNTV will be the best fit for this to execute this work, because they have been engaged with the Purple Line project in the environmental assessment process since 2018, when at that point Ramsey County was leading the project. They also were hired back then, 2018 through 2021, to support Kimberly Horn during the environmental assessment process in reviewing technical documents, so they have first knowledge of the project. There is another supporting justification for Kimberly Horn is that For HNTB is that Kimberly Horn is already engaged as the design lead on this project, so they cannot participate in bidding the environmental additional work. So that puts HNTB as the only firm that is available and will provide the service with us. Another supporting idea is that we have looked at the cost factor, and it is estimated that if we went through hiring a new firm that will extend the project timeline schedule by 2 to 3 months, and will also increase the cost of the project by another 10% or more. So, and that is why we're recommending that sole source. Also, there is to our schedule overall. We are also looking at if we didn't move forward with HNTB and went ahead and try to hire a new consultant, the current schedule puts us, for this amendment, puts us on a critical path, and that will also cause a delay in submitting FTA-CIG. That can ultimately drop us out of the FTA-CIG program. So with that, I yield for questions.
Well, that was some really good information, a lot of considerations for your proposed amendment number 3. Any questions? Councilmember Dolka?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have 2 questions, both are clarifying questions. So for the first one, has HNTB worked on any other projects outside of Purple Line? And is it usually the practice that you would have? I guess I have 3 questions, I apologize. So that's the first question. And then the second question is it usually the case with every project where if you hire somebody, then it becomes too expensive to switch consultants, and so and for most projects, you then end up continuing with the same consultants for the projects? That's my second question. And the third question I have is, what is the project cost? The $7 million that I can see in the memo, is that the additional money that you're seeking up to? And so there is another pre-cost, and this is additional $7 million, or so far up until now, that's the entire project cost?
Thank you for the question, Council Member. HNTB is a firm that we've used on several other projects, including the Orange Line that I work on, and also they're involved with the Gold Line project as well. So I think this is also just tying to council policy that any amendment that exceeds 10% of the original contract value and needs to go through the process of council approval, and if the contract also exceeds 500,000 at time of execution. I don't know as to whether it's common practice across the board, but I think based on our analysis on this particular amendment, we see that the cost benefits of keeping HNTB as a consultant to continue with these projects outweighs going out there to go find a new consultant to start going through onboarding and all of that. That's where I spoke as to extending, that would delay the project potentially, and I would also increase the cost of the project. And I don't remember the second question.
I think Jody wants to say
Oh,
something.
you want to say something?
Madam Chair, Council Member Jody Jacoby, Chief Procurement Officer. So your first question, we do work with HNTB. They have done work for us and many other public agencies. You asked a question about if there's additional work, is it always the same consultant, I believe. And sometimes it is, it depends on the work. And there's a number of factors that we look at in consideration if we're going to sole source additional work beyond the 10%. Some of those are, can we take part of the work and then bring it back to the market to determine if there are other contractors or consultants that can perform it. Some other elements that we look at is time. We have average procurement lead times that we look at in relation to the urgency of the work and the immediate need to bring forward. Another element that we look at in determination if we should be proceeding as a sole source is looking at the cost. Is the cost with possibly bringing in another firm going to be excessive or going to have a negative impact? And so many of these factors were looked at in consideration with bringing this specific request forward as a sole source.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Can I do a follow-up? So again, a clarifying question so I can understand it. I think I understood from one of our last meetings that if we go with the sole source process in terms of choosing consultants, then in the sole source, the consultants are not required to meet diversity, equity, inclusion goal on hiring process as well as MCUB. Is that still true or am I misunderstanding?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Ashanti Payne, answer that.
Madam Chair, Council and Committee members, Ashanti Payne, Assistant Director, Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity. To address your question, in this case, there was a goal originally set on this project. This is not a newly procured sole source agreement, so the vendor will be required to continue to meet, or in this case, exceed the established goal that was originally set on the project.
Okay. That's really helpful to know. Thank you so much.
Thank you, good questions. I think there was one more question about the total cost. I'm not sure if that was.
Oh yeah, the total cost of the project, which I guess I could look up online too.
No, I can answer that. And yes, the total cost of the project, including this amendment that we're discussing today, will be at that 7 million. What is the exact number? At 7,272,394.93. So that will be the total project cost, including this amendment.
Thank you, good questions. Other questions? Thank you so much for giving us that overview of the Purple Line contract amendment. Craig, Edwin, Megan, and our other staff members. So at this time, I will ask if there is a motion to approve 2024-45 Metro Purple Line Bus Rapid Transit Contract Amendment Number 3 to Contract 22P031 with sole source provider HNTB. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
Did I hear it? Okay, Council Carter and Morales seconded. Any discussion? With no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries. Thank you so much. Next, we have 2024-74 Metro Purple Line Bus Rapid Transit Rights of Entry Resolution 2024-4, again with Craig Lamothe, Megan, and Edwin Awasan.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Megan Litzy. Litzy is pronounced like someone lit a fire, and sea like the ocean, so Litzy. My preferred pronouns are she, her. I am the Purple Line Environmental Compliance Lead, and I am sharing with you today business item 2024-74 for Purple Line Bus Rapid Transit Rights of Entry Resolution with you today. Essentially, our proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council adopts Resolution 2024-4 that authorizes access to properties for survey, environmental testing, geotechnical investigations, including subsurface utility engineering and archaeological investigations in accordance with Minnesota statutes 473.129, subdivision 9, and 117.041. The reason why this item is being brought to you today is the project is currently in the project development phase. In order to advance the design, additional field survey is required to essentially validate those field conditions so that when the design continues to advance, it is informed based on those existing conditions and the design accommodates those existing conditions. Some examples of the types of different survey or investigation that will be completed associated with this work is construction surveying, wetland delineation, and geotechnical type investigation. We anticipate that the right of entry and notification work will begin next month, consistent with the next steps of the project approval process, and the survey will potentially start in May of this year. This resolution will ultimately allow the project manager on our project to pursue potential court orders for access in the event that there are, after we've made some voluntary efforts to reach out to property owners, what have you, if that's not successful, then to pursue those court orders in order to facilitate the work. With that, that concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions on that? Okay, one question with Councilmember Cameron.
Yeah, so I'm just curious how long this process takes. We saw the timeline in the previous slide, so given some of our previous projects, how long does this process take to go through? And, sorry, the sun is hitting my eyes just exactly. How long does this process take to go through?
Madam Chair, committee member, I will defer to Craig. I don't want to state incorrectly. You might have more information.
Madam Chair, committee member, so the process that would be covered under this right of entry would be primarily doing survey work this summer to feed into that timeline slide. I don't know if it's an ability to pull it up, but I think it's on your iPads. It would feed into the 30% design, which I believe is March or April of next year complete, as was described by Megan. A lot of this is weather sensitive, so our window of opportunity is really May through, we'll say October, unless we get a light winter again. We need to try to get all that work done yet this year to feed into the 30% design plans. We would continue to use this right of entry to continue to do some survey work that would follow after the 30% plans, but a vast majority of survey work typically is done on these kind of projects before you get to 30%. Tends to be where we identify a lot of our unknowns that we can't see above ground, that are below ground, obstacles, utilities, contaminated soils, and other things that would come through the geotechnical work. So we hope to discover all that this summer.
I think I had a second question about whether it was all surface level. I think you addressed that. So is it?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Councilmember, it's going to be a mix of both. It'll be non-invasive, checking right-of-way lines. Right now we're using GIS as an example, but we really need to go out there and mark the right-of-way lines. They might be off by a few feet, and that might make a very big difference with some of the design concepts we're considering for White Bear Avenue, because it's so tight. And then the geotechnical work would be subsurface work, really identification of the soil type. We have soft soils, hard soils, contaminated soils, and those kinds of things. So it's going to be a mix of both. There'll be some things that if we have a property owner that is opposed to us being out there right now, we'll make an assessment whether we need those court orders now or whether that's something we could defer until after 30% design. That sometimes happens as well. But our preference is to use our outreach team and work with the property owners that we need to get onto their property for.
Good question. Any other questions? One more for Susan Pinto, council member.
I don't have a question, I just have a comment. It was about a year ago that this project took a very pivotal turn. And I want to commend Craig and Nick Thompson and the entire Purple Line team, as well as Ramsey County and the cities that are a part of this project. The work that's been done has been phenomenal. The resilience has been above and beyond, and especially to the staff, I can't thank you enough. This is no longer part of my district, but in my previous district it was, and I remember the first time I met Craig, Charles and Craig and I met at a coffee shop over in Minneapolis. Couldn't find it now if I tried to, but it's been just a real pleasure hearing Craig's reports on this. And I want to just really commend the really thoughtful work that's gone into this. The mode has changed from what was originally planned many moons ago, many moons ago, and now the route has changed. And it's because folks were willing to work together and do their best to get this job done. So I'm really grateful, and I just want to say thanks. Although it's no longer a part of my district, I still feel very invested in it. Thank you.
Thanks for providing that background and perspective. Any other comments or questions? Doesn't look like it, so thank you so much for the presentation. So at this point, I will ask about the proposed action that the Met Council adopt Resolution 2024 that authorizes access to properties for survey, environmental testing, geotechnical investigations, including subsurface utility engineering and archaeological investigations in accordance with Minnesota statutes 473.129 subdivision 9 and 117.041. Is there a motion?
So moved.
So moved by Councilmember Vento, second. Second by Councilmember Diego Morales. Any further? Oh, I did that again.
We're psychic.
I'm listening to the voices. Okay, so Councilmember Tyrone Carter has seconded. And with any further discussion? No further discussion, so with that, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Nay? That motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have 2024-51, non-consent business item number 7, master contracts for Metro Transit Architecture and Engineering Design Services for contract 23P112 with Julie Brenny presenting.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Council members. I'm Julie Brenny. I am a Senior Project Administrator with Metro Transit Engineering and Facilities, and I use the pronouns she, her. I'm presenting business item 2024-51, Master Contracts for Metro Transit Architecture and Engineering Design Services. Engineering and Facilities uses master contracts for a number of disciplines. The department also makes all of our contracts available to other groups, such as the BRT offices, transit-oriented development. They've been used by the large project offices, so they get used across Metro Transit. We even had MTS use one of our contracts recently, so we share them. This group of contracts replaces previous contracts which have expired and is our largest and most broad group of contracts as far as disciplines. The contracts are used by staff for a wide range of capital and operating projects, many of which Ed Petrie mentioned in his business item. And funding for the work is provided for in those projects or within the operating budget. This was a very competitive procurement. We knew it would be. There was significant interest from the professional services community regarding the contracts. And engineering and facilities prior to the pandemic had participated or led numerous meet and greet type of events where we brought various disciplines together in a room so they could mingle and make connections. So for this group of contracts, we wanted to have a meeting of that nature. And so the pre-proposal meeting was held in person at the Haywood offices, and It was noted in the procurement documents that that would be occurring, and procurement assisted us with sending out emails and making phone calls to drive the participation in that meeting. The pre-proposal meeting had 40 people attending in person, representing different disciplines in different firms. And we also had 8 people attending virtually because we offered both methods of attending the meeting. And then following the pre-proposal meeting, we had an open session where larger firms staffed a table and smaller firms and many DBE firms could introduce themselves and discuss becoming part of a team. So we felt like this really offered people an opportunity to connect and drive more participation in the project. The procurement was a Brooks Act procurement, which has a 2-step process. After the proposals were received, an evaluation panel was selected. The panel discussed and debated the merits of the proposals received and eventually reached a consensus on which proposers were the most technically qualified to complete the work. After that process was completed, a negotiation panel met to review the proposed contractors and first determined that the prices provided in their cost proposals were fair and reasonable. And then that panel also discussed the contract values and how to best meet the needs of the council with contract values. Only the contractors who are selected submit a cost proposal. There is no costs reviewed when the proposals themselves are reviewed. We do that as a second part of the process. The Office of Equity and Equal Opportunity included a 15% DBE goal for this group of contracts, and we are awarding 3 contracts to DBE firms. Those firms are Ronnie Engineering, Codet Architectural Group, and Formula. We also saw several new DBE firms show up as part of the teams that the various firms have presented. So that was actually encouraging to see, and several of those firms were in our in-person meet and greets. So hopefully all of that worked together to get to that end. In conclusion, we're requesting authorization to award 12 contracts valued at $500 to $1.5 million each, with a total of $12 million. And the contracts will be valid for a term of 5 years. With that, I can answer any questions anyone may have.
Any questions? Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask for a motion on the proposed action.
So moved.
It's been moved by Councilmember Morales, and second, is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Dolkar. Any discussion? Without any discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Nay? That motion carries. Thank you. All right, next non-consent business item number 8, 2024-58, designation of potential DOT sites with Mr. Michael Krantz.
Madam Chair, committee members, I'm Michael Krantz, Senior Manager of Transit-Oriented Development for Metro Transit. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm presenting an item to update the council-approved list of potential TOD sites. This list is significant because the TOD fund that was established when the TOD policy was adopted can only be used to advance projects that are on this list. And this is really a first step that we take to begin exploring feasibility for TOD on these sites. So this is a map of the TOD sites on the list that's included in the business item. It corresponds with that, and it shows how that list is going to be changing. So the sites shown in green here are existing on the existing approved list and will remain on that list. Sites shown in yellow are being added. There are 9 sites that are being added to that list. 5 of them were acquired as part of the Metro Green Line extension and the Metro Gold Line. And then 4 of those sites represent existing parking facilities where there may be additional TOD opportunity. And then we're proposing to remove 2 sites from that list. One was the former MTPD headquarters at 2425 Minnehaha, which was sold several years ago. And then another of these is the West River Road and 117 Park and Ride, which has been closed, and the plan is to sell that site, so it will no longer be a TOD opportunity either. So just to briefly talk about some of the criteria that we use to identify these sites, we look at several different factors, including the proximity to transit surface, both existing and planned. What is the size of that site? What are the existing facilities in use? Are those compatible with TOD? What are the local planned land uses and zoning? Do cities support TOD in these locations? What are adjacent uses? And then we also review with staff across the board, just to understand if there may be future conflicts with TOD at any of these locations. And again, this review is really just looking at this from a high level to understand if there are any barriers to looking or advancing TOD on these sites. And then once they're on the list, then we can start exploring the feasibility, the financial feasibility, the technical feasibility, the environmental feasibility of actually advancing a project on any of these particular sites. So it's really meant to kind of open the door, and it allows us to respond to opportunities as they come up. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Well, I think it's really interesting to see this potential TOD site map. The visuals are always helpful in terms of helping to see what our region is looking like and how it might change in the future. A question by Councilmember Dokar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 2 questions, both are again clarifying questions. My first question is, are the TOD sites shared with the local governments before it comes to us? And then my second question is, how does this site selection interact with the TOD related grants that Lisa Barajas and her team coordinates and implements?
Madam Chair, Councilmember, thank you for those questions. So in terms of the first question, we work very closely with cities before we do any effort to advance a TOD on a particular site. Occasionally cities are aware, I mean, in most cases, they're aware that we own a site in this particular location, but we would often go through preliminary due diligence before we would reach out to the city to see what their priorities are in a particular location. So we work very closely with these partners before any project is advanced. And then with respect to the second question, sorry, would you mind repeating the second question?
In the CDC committee, we tend to look at transit-oriented development and the funding that is associated with it. And so I'm wondering, what is the coordination or correlation between the site selection here and the grant applications that we put out?
Madam Chair and Councilmember, thank you for that clarification. So typically LCA grants are going through cities to developers to help advance projects. There are limitations on actually awarding those projects to council-owned sites, so that essentially the council is not awarding grants to itself. If there's a way to show that the council is not receiving any of that, then potentially some of those sites could be eligible to receive those grants. But they have to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay, can you repeat for me, because I think I missed it, one of the removed sites that is in the north west corner with the red dot, which site was that?
Sure, sorry, Madam Chair, that is West River Road and 117th.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so thank you for that presentation. With that, I think we can go ahead and start the motion process for the designation of potential TOD sites 2024-58. Is there a motion?
So moved.
It's been moved by Dokar and seconded by Tyrone Carter. Any discussion? No further discussion, so all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay, so that motion carries. Thank you so much. I got it right this time? Oh, it was the other Carter.
It's that Carter.
So funny. Okay, moving on. Thank you for your grace. To 2024-66 Transportation Committee Work Plan. We have a presentation with Mr. Charles Carlson sitting next to me.
And I'll present this with the general manager. Thank you, Madam Chair. Council members, the updated work plan is included in your packet. So the committee would adopt this work plan. Obviously, we would continue to refine and adjust as the year goes on. But we have a number of different information items that are listed in this and will be coming through the process. You may note that several of them that have specific dates are already on here as ones that will be complete or complete as of the end of the meeting tonight. So we made one addition, which was the suggested regional transportation finance overview. That will be going to the TAAB, the Transportation Advisory Board, in April. So we'll seek to bring it to this group around that time, or hopefully a little bit before that time as well. So that's kind of a, the council operates one piece of the transportation system, but this would be the wider view of the broader world of transportation over the next 25 years.
Thank you so much. Did you have anything, Leslie? Okay. Thanks for that presentation. Any questions? It's nice to have the work plans and what the timeline is for each of those work plans as council members, so we can kind of follow that and plan and ask our questions in advance. So with that, I'm asking for a motion to approve the Transportation Committee Work Plan 2024-66.
So moved.
It's been moved by Councilmember Morales.
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Tyrone Carter. Any discussion? Without any discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Nay, that motion carries. Oh, okay. So I'm recommending that we move items number 1, 2, 6, and 7 to consent. Is everyone okay with that?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and do that. Thank you. And then next we have a couple information items. Better Bus Stops 2023 highlights with Barry Farrington and Paul Lamb.
Thank you.
They will be presenting.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. I'm Barry Farrington. I'm here with Paul Lamb. We're with the Engineering and Facilities Department at Metro Transit. We're giving an annual update to Transportation Committee about the Better Bus Stops program, which is Metro Transit's commitment to the customer experience at the bus stop through shelters, accessible boarding areas, light, heat, improvements of that nature. So this first slide is just our program's goals. The first is that we continue to invest in bus shelters, light and heat equitably in our regular route bus network. The next two goals are about bus stop accessibility, and in that case, that means having a place that's clear of obstacles for passengers to get on and off the bus's front door, paved, connected to the pedestrian path. And there's a photo here that shows what that can look like. So where we have shelters, we want to focus on this in particular, and then just that every year we continue to advance on more accessible bus stops through our own projects and in partnership with others. And then lastly, in support of Metro Transit's Safety and Security Action Plan, we are working on adding light to bus shelters. So first I wanted to note that 2024 is a year to reevaluate and consider the program given the new sales tax in the region, and it includes supporting funds for bus stop accessibility and transit shelter improvements and replacements. So in 2024, we are accelerating our capital plan. We have doubled the goal of how many bus stops we work on accessibility improvements. We're aiming for 60 bus stops this year. 30 has been our previous goal. We're also accelerating the rate at which we add shelters to bus stops that haven't had them in the past and meet our shelter placement guidelines. So we look for at least 30 customer boardings per day to consider adding a shelter, and then we have other criteria to help further prioritize, such as, is it a transfer point? Is it near housing for people with disabilities? Is it things of that nature? So those are kind of our capital program response just in this year on the new sales tax and the legislation from last year. Additionally, we are going to review and update these shelter placement guidelines that I mentioned. So that's the guidance we use to put investments across our system. And this effort is in response to 3 significant forces of change. One is the arterial BRT expansion as customers move from regular route bus service and bus stops with bus shelters to arterial BRT, such as the D-Line service, enhanced stations. We want to adapt our program to complement that expansion of BRT. Second is just that we're in this time of post-pandemic transit system. We're settling out what that looks like through Network Now, our service investment plan coming out later this year. And our travel patterns as a region, we know where we are a little more, so we want to make sure our bus shelter's in the right place. And then just with this commitments to the legislation, the new funding, we want to match our guidelines to those resources and commitments. Finally, we have in 2024 more ways to receive customer feedback about cleaning and repairs. So on our website, there's a place where you can upload a photo and let us know what needs cleaning, what needs repair. At stations, there's a QR code. And we reviewed this information with the Transportation Accessibility Advisory Committee last week, and they were very pleased to have the access to that. So every year we evaluate the outcomes of our program, and this is about bus, what is the bus customer experience for regular route buses and for arterial BRT. And every year since 2016, we've looked at the share of boardings that happen where we have shelters, shelter lighting, and heat. And so you can see that over the years, we are on an upward trend. In 2016, 58% of bus boardings happened where there was shelter. And last winter, 71% of bus boardings happened where there's shelter. We also annually do this metric. Where am I supposed to point, or did the battery just? Okay, thanks, Mom.
Okay.
This happens with my TV remote sometimes too. Thank you. So we use a racial equity lens to look at that same metric. So here for our most recent data, we look at the system-wide average compared to bus stops that serve majority of community members who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And so the rate for those BIPOC community members is similar or slightly greater for access to light, heat, shelters, and that's helping us measure our goal to continue that equitable distribution of shelters, light, and heat. Oh, and now it worked for me. Thanks. Thank you. So our program has kind of 3 areas of work: our programmatic improvements, capital improvements, and pilot projects. So I'll just talk about, it's working for me, all right. Programmatic improvements, which is the business processes we need to have in place to make the system work, to make our program work. So first up in 2023, we updated this regular route bus stop design guide, which is online. It's the design best practices we use and that we share with roadway projects, development projects to design and build good bus stops. So this year's update included how do we add accessible bus stops in places where there are not sidewalks or trails. The next improvement is data modernization. We've been using a 25-year-old database to track where our shelters are located, and that helps us maintain them, clean them. So in 2023 in the fall, we launched a new database that holds more information about our shelters and is tied to our work order system, so we have a better idea of what's going on in real time. Third is we've moved the needle on how we coordinate with roadway projects, development projects. We've been tracking that since 2020, and we've gotten 100 or so bus stops constructed or in plans by others' projects. So like when a road is reconstructed, they're out there building a sidewalk. Yes, they built our bus stop as well. That's good coordination. Oh.
Thank you, Barry. Regarding capital improvements and what we were able to accomplish in 2023, we were able to add 19 shelters at bus stops that previously hadn't had them. We were able to replace 25 shelters that were at the end of their useful life, so about 20 years old. We were able to install 82 accessible paved boarding areas to make it easier to board and alight the bus at the bus stop sign. And then we were able to add light and heat at 4 shelters. And these numbers do not include the 29 enhanced bus stops and future B-line ABRT stations that went in on Selby, Marshall, and East Lake Street. And the third strategy we've been using is pilot projects. And I'll highlight 3. One is a shelter beautification project where we work with local artists to provide images to place on shelters, both to make it a better looking bus stop, but also to try and reduce glass breakage. And that's something that we've been trying since 2021. So far, we've been seeing about a 50% reduction in glass breakage at these locations where we have these images installed. So we're looking to continue that in the future. In 2022, we started going with, or trying out rooftop mounted solar light to provide light at a shelter without any infrastructure beyond the shelter itself. We installed 19 of those in 2022 and we evaluated them in 2023. I'll talk about that in a couple of slides. And then the last one is we've been looking at alternative material to use to reduce glass breakage, and we've been trying out polycarbonate glass. It's very hard to break, it's a little easier to scratch, and it's a lot more costly for the initial capital cost. We're evaluating that this year. We want to get a full 4 seasons and kind of see how it does and ages over all 4 seasons of the year. And in terms of construction highlights, the coordination that Barry mentioned with roadway authorities has really started paying off. The 82 boarding pads that I mentioned on the previous slide, about half of those were installed by other roadway agencies through coordination with us, or including our comments and designs in their plans. The other half was through Metro Transit-led projects. And then, as I mentioned, with the solar lighting shelter pilot, we've evaluated that this year. We found that they've all still been working. They've required minimal maintenance. So we're going to be expanding that by another 40 sites in 2024. And with that, thank you for your time, and we'll stand for questions.
Thank you for that information, Barry and Paul. Questions? Councilmember Tyrone?
I had a question, I'm just trying to get an understanding. So some shelters have heat and some don't?
Madam Chair and council members, yes, that's correct. For shelters, we look at a boarding kind of criteria of if it has 30 more boardings a day, we would start looking at putting a shelter in. For heat, because that's a lot more costly, trying to get to an XL utility pole or some other source of power, we start looking at that at 100 boardings per day. And then Barry, can you remind me of the guidelines or thresholds for light?
Sure, if we look at adding light, we don't have a number as a threshold like with a shelter or heat, but we look at the percent of boardings that are happening evening, overnight, and early morning, so we can know that customers are out there at that time and we use it when it's dark outside.
So is it clearly marked if a shelter has heat or if it doesn't? Or?
Madam Chair and committee members, the way you know a shelter has heat is there's a heat lamp that hangs down and then there's a button that is pushed to make it turn on.
I've got a question too, to ask it before I forget. So if you have solar and does it always have utilities? This is kind of a dumb question, but do you need the utilities for that button to work?
Madam Chair and committee members, I guess for light, there isn't any push button activation. That's something that just turns on either on a timer or a photo cell. And for solar lighting, that's still the case. I was going to say that there aren't any utilities connected to a solar lit shelter because light would be the same for either solar or hardwired, but the utility or the energy needed to power a heater is such that we can't do that with a solar unit at this point. There's just too much heat and energy that's put off. So, for either solar or utilities, there isn't any button to push. And if we do have hardwired utilities to something, or if something has a heater, it would already have light. We would put that as standard with that.
Thank you. Councilmember Dolkar.
I have a couple of recommendations, and I'm not sure if it's our jurisdiction on this committee or if it's a policy that we need to write in under the Better Bus Stop. But my sense, as somebody who has used the bus stops, especially if you are piloting the solar lights, is motion sensor light on every stop feels like the bare minimum we should do. The fact that you could be standing on a stop sign in the dark when Minnesota hits dark at like 5 p.m. in winter is shocking to me. So I didn't realize there were stops without access to light unless there's street lighting on the side, but that feels like at bare minimum we should do that. The second recommendation I have, again similarly, is when I'm looking at the slide number 4, the shelter number and the light numbers are different. That feels shocking to me. I feel like that should be equal. Like if you have a shelter, at bare minimum, the minimum thing you would do is put on a light and a seating. And then the heating, I get it because of the cost and debatable and whether, but when you have, technology has improved to the extent that people don't have to use it unless they're there, so you can conserve the energy. So that feels like a policy that we either write in or we take on as a position. I'm actually kind of flabbergasted about this one.
Okay, thank you for that question. Is there a response?
Chair and members of the committee, I appreciate hearing your feedback and experience, and that is a good example of here we are to look at, should these guidelines change? What would be better for our system given this changing landscape we have in terms of funding where we put our shelters. So I just want to say thank you.
And that's prompting another question for me, and that is, how much is the solar equipment in terms of cost per shelter?
Madam Chair and committee members, it depends a little bit on who the manufacturer is or what they provide. We did an open solicitation, so we received, I think, 3 or 4 bids for, with the current contract that we have, that we're ordering the 40 additional sites and did the initial 19 sites under. That was, I think, around $5,000 per site with material and the labor to install them. But yeah, that was also the lowest bid of the bidders. So there are some that were, I won't say how much they were, I can't remember offhand, but they were more expensive.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments, Councilmember?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks because where I grew up, you only had bus shelters downtown where the businesses were. And in the outlying areas, this is another city, you didn't have any bus shelters at all. So it was basically based on who had the money, which were the businesses, and in the neighborhoods, you were on your own. And so you had a lot of kids standing out on those corners, and I was one of them in the wintertime. So, thanks.
Thank you for that perspective, Councilmember Montel.
Madam Chair, thanks.
Nice sunglasses too.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm in the sunlight here. I'm a star. I appreciate your remark, Councilmember Carter, and I want to note that in my neck of the woods, there are a number of bus stops that don't have shelters. And last fall, in one of the cities, I was asked about snow removal, and I learned that there are 12,000 bus stops within our metro, I think if that's the correct number, within our metro transit system. I think it would be interesting at some point to kind of have an inventory of what amenities exist at what bus shelters. And the one request that I've had repeatedly, including recently from a city in my former district, is trash receptacles. Preferably, I would ask for recycling as well, but just to have a trash receptacle would be really great so that we could avoid having our transit sites look like garbage stops. So just wanted to share that.
Councilmember Tony Carter.
And I just want to add my thanks for the work that's done to make sure that these bus stops are available with heat and light, and that people are able to wait in safety even during dark times of the winter. But I also wanted to add that when I was a school board member, I did some planning with students in public schools, and one of the things that they want are bathrooms at every shelter, at every bus stop. So we need to keep that in mind and see how we can work on that. I wanted to ask too, to confirm that this is about availability of light, not just Met Council provided light. Is that true?
Chair and members of the committee, I'm glad you asked that. This is about light at Metro Transit's bus shelters or arterial BRT station shelters. It does not look at, as you mentioned, is there a street light nearby that provides that illumination?
I asked that because I think we would need to understand that in context as well as we look at that light availability. It may be available, it may not be ours. And I think that should come into our consideration. We should keep an eye on it to make sure that there is light available and to increase the percentage of those stops or those riders who wait in light. And the other thing is, I almost lost it. No, I have lost it. I've lost the other thing. I do that sometimes. So let me come back. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, thank you. I think good things to consider. Some of them are things to consider that are in addition to the shelters, the light and the heat. Some things like bathrooms would take us into a paradigm shift, I think, in terms of how we do it. But when you said that, I thought of like hubs, service areas, where they're not at every shelter, but there are certain locations where you can go get a drink and use the restroom or, pick up a bicycle or whatever it is. But
even if you have to take a bus to get there.
Well, yeah, maybe another bike to get there, who knows? But yeah, I think we're kind of brainstorming a little bit too, and that's always good things to kind of chew on. Are there any other questions or comments from council members?
Madam Chair.
Okay, Councilmember Bento.
At the risk of sounding a little anxious, perhaps hysterical, not in a funny way, but an anxious way, if we can just make sure that the other stops have some basic amenities before we start, putting in all the other stuff, I'd really appreciate it, because we've got some bus stops out there on some fairly busy county roads where there's no shelter, there's no light, there's no nothing, and cars are whipping by, and frankly, I think I'd be scared to death if I was at some of those stops. Thank you.
Councilmember Pacheco.
Madam Chair, Member St. Now I live between two, a bus stop here and a bus stop here. Neither one has a shelter, and there's two different buses that meet at that corner and goes around. Is there a formula for how many blocks is between each light or stop?
Council, there's a stop spacing guideline, so quarter mile to 1/8 of a mile stop spacing is what is in the transportation policy plan.
Councilmember Carter.
Just so that Councilmember Bento knows, I was kind of joking about bathrooms at every stop. Okay, no, but
sorry.
The thing that I did want to bring back was that as we're looking at the availability of lighting and heat at those shelters, we talk about it in terms of the percent of riders. Did you indicate, or can you, the percent of stops that have lighting or shelter? Is there any comment?
Yes, Chair and members of the committee, about 10% of bus stops have a shelter, and then it's less for light and heat. I don't have that count, but it's a fairly big impact in terms of customers for a pretty relatively small number of that 12,000 bus stops.
Thank you.
Councilmember Tyrone.
Yeah, I would be interested in knowing how we compare to other cities that are our size, that have a similar transportation system in size to us in terms of sheltered, bus shelters and the characteristics of those shelters, just, you know, just for a comparability feel to see if, you know, are we at the top of that, are we in the middle, and we can improve, and, you know.
Chair and members of the committee, that is part of our interest in looking at our guidelines, like how have things changed with our peer agencies, how are we doing? If you'd like to look it up, the Transit Center Foundation and Research has a publication called From Sorry to Superb about bus stops, and you'll see that Metro Transit is on the superb side in that publication.
Thank you. I think we've got all our questions answered so far. So thank you for the information on that, and I'm sure there'll be more information based on all of our questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have on the information item list, introduction to the 2025 arterial BRT plan update with Katie Roth and Kyle. Hold on.
All right, good afternoon, Chair and council members. I'm Katie Roth, Director of Arterial BRT. Owing to the lateness of the hour, the sun angle, and the weather outside, we will keep this brief today. It is very much intended to be an introduction to some planning work that is getting underway right now and will be completed by the end of 2025 to name the next lines in our arterial BRT network. I'm going to provide a look back at the last time that we updated our ABRT plans and how a few projects have been advancing since then, and then Kyle will provide a look forward. And I'll just say also that the reason we're here today, while there are so many planning efforts going on, most notably Network Now, looking at our service improvement priorities coming forward, is that we get a lot of questions as we go out and talk with our stakeholders and the public about how decisions are going to be made, when decisions are going to be made regarding arterial BRT. So we wanted to provide that foundation today to really get us moving forward on the right foot. So with that, this is a look back at Network Next, the outcomes of Network Next that were completed in 2020 and 2021. This was a 2-year plan, a very intensive process that builds on Met Council policy, did a lot of rigorous data analysis, and then brought in a lot of community engagement perspectives to ultimately result in these 3 bullets here. The first was that the council adopted our next 3 at the time, arterial BRT lines for implementation between 2025 and 2030. These are now the F, G, and H lines, which we're advancing today. The second action was to identify 7 additional candidate corridors that could be implemented between 2030 and 2040. These are the yellow lines on the map that you're looking at today. And then those 2 outcomes were amended into the 2040 version of the Transportation Policy Plan through a following action. So since that time, one thing we've really learned is that it's really important to prioritize these lines a few years in advance and get that pipeline built. Not only because the planning, the engineering work takes a considerable amount of time to move through, but also so that we have an early opportunity to bring our partners to the table as they're thinking about roadway investments, street improvements, other things that can be coordinated with these major transitway projects. And we really spend a lot of time with our partners thinking about the best ways to sync up the investments that they have planned in these corridors with what we are doing for transit. So I'll just note here that since 2021, the F, G, and H lines have each made significant progress toward being implemented by 2030. You can see the bullet points here. I'll speak a little bit more about the F line on the next slide, but really the story there is that we're coordinating quite a bit with MnDOT, who owns the 2 corridors that project travels on. Same story with the G line, except there our key partners are Ramsey County, Dakota County, and MnDOT again. And then the H line is the next project that we're just getting underway with planning on. That is the east-west connector between downtown Minneapolis and the east side of St. Paul. We're underway on planning, and this has been included in Governor Walz's recommendations for 2024 capital investment for that project. So a little bit more on the MnDOT coordination. I want to just cover this before handing off to Kyle to speak to what's coming up next for arterial BRT planning. So at the time that the F line was named, when we went through that Network Next planning process, MnDOT was studying some long-term safety and multimodal improvements to both Central Avenue and University Avenue, which are the 2 corridors that this line would run on. At that time, they did not have any program investment beyond maintenance levels in those corridors. However, now at the completion of the 2-year study of those improvements, MnDOT has decided to program significant funding for improvements along Highway 65, which is Central Avenue, and Highway 47, which is University Avenue. Notably, on Highway 65 in Columbia Heights in Minneapolis, as shown outlined in blue on this map. Improvements are going to address safety needs, make it easier for people to walk, bike, and take transit in this very important corridor. Previously, the F line was planned for construction in 2025 and 2026. However, with the majority of the project construction that MnDOT is planning scheduled for 2028, we are making the decision to shift the F line construction to better align with MnDOT's work in this corridor. This is going to minimize disruption and get the best final project, and will also really represent a transformative amount of improvements in this corridor. So we are working very closely with MnDOT to determine both an overall combined construction schedule for Highway 65 and for Highway 47, as well as working with them as the financial plan details come together for their investment in this corridor. At this point, we will not identify a new opening day for the F line. That is something that will be generated as we work closely with MnDOT on this combined schedule. However, we do expect, we're confident that this project will still be eligible and competitive for federal funding on an anticipated revised schedule. So I wanted to provide that update today, as it's really indicative of the amount of coordination that goes into these projects with our partners and the importance of lining up that queue of projects so that we can really have those intensive conversations early. With that, I will turn it over to Kyle to speak to where we're headed next.
Great, thanks, Katie. Kyle O'Donnell Burrows, Planning Manager for Arterial BRT. So as we're continuing to advance the F, G, and H lines, as Katie has kind of outlined, we're also continuing to look forward beyond that 2030 planning horizon with the 2025 Arterial BRT plan update. So just like Network Next, where we sort of identified those next we have kind of 2 core outcomes where we are identifying the next lines to be programmed, and in this case implemented between 2030 and 2035. So these would be designated as the J, K, and L lines. And then additionally, speaking to the importance of project coordination going forward, identifying those additional candidate corridors that could be good candidates to implement for arterial BRT. In this case now prior to 2050, updating that horizon to align with the in-progress 2050 Transportation Policy Plan. The outcomes of this work would then be adopted into the 2050 TPP by an amendment following the completion of this plan in late 2025. We anticipate doing that in 2026, and we'll work with MTS on coordination on that process. We are still in the process of scoping out this plan, but in terms of our preliminary approach, we are really building on the robust planning efforts that we have done in the past on Network Next, and are continuing to do now on Network Now on the local bus side of things. So we're looking candidate corridors here for the plan update. Will really be drawn from those existing high priority corridors, starting with those 7 additional corridors identified in Network Next as candidate corridors. And really kind of continuing to build on the work that Network Now has done around updating and then kind of reflecting council policy with where our local bus network that these arterial BRT lines are built on is going to be going. Of course, like all of our planning work, this will have a robust engagement component to it, along with our regional stakeholders, as with riders and community members. And then our prioritization approach, I think in particular, looking at both that technical performance and that readiness factor that we looked at with Network Next, really emphasizing both phasing with our metro network plans and aligning with city, county, state partners' plans for their road construction, so that we are really aligning our priorities for implementation with those other programmed projects run by our other partners. This slide has just a high-level look ahead over where our planned activities on this project are for the next 2 years. So really spending the first half of this year kicking this project off, introducing it to our project partners and making sure that folks know it's coming. The latter half of this year will be spent really sort of updating and confirming the guiding principles that have kind of come through Network Next, have been carried through Network Now, as well as identifying and finalizing those candidate corridors to consider. Most of 2025 then will be spent evaluating and prioritizing those candidate corridors to get us down to that J, K, and L line recommendation before we'll be finalizing those plan recommendations and taking them to the council for adoption in Q4 of 2025, timed to identify the J line with the to be submitted to the regional solicitation process in that's open in September to December of that year for the 26 solicitation. Thank you. And with that, we'll quickly hit our next steps. So we continue to coordinate with our internal partners on Network Now, the project team there, and other stakeholders involved with that, both on process and on public engagement. And we are preparing a detailed project schedule and scope for consultant support to help us deliver this project on time. And with that, Katie and I will stand for any questions.
Thanks, Katie and Kyle. Councilmember Vento.
It's kind of a strange question, and if you've already covered this and I missed it, I apologize, but who are the partners and the stakeholders? I'm guessing
Sure.
TAAC is on the list, but
That's right. Chair Chandlis and committee members. So TAAC is on the list, certainly. It's really all of our local government partners, so municipalities, counties, MnDOT as noted. There's also, our riders and the general public, other advisory groups, the TAAC, the Equity Advisory Group. It's a very broad list of stakeholders and partners. Specifically when it comes to project delivery and kind of other roadway projects, that really is sort of the roadway and right-of-way authority owners, so the MnDOT, the counties, and then cities as kind of key partners there.
so does that include like Metro Cities, the Association of Counties, the Association of Cities, or the League of Cities, League of Counties? Does that include all those groups, or how? I'm just curious how much I need to be advertising this with cities and townships, and how much of it they're gonna get, whether I do or not.
Chair and council member, typically our interface is directly with the municipalities, with the counties who are represented by those member organizations.
Okay.
And less so with the organizations in name that you mentioned.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? I know there will be more to come. Thanks for putting in the high-level timeline. There's a lot of activity going on, and I like to see the coordination with MnDOT and also between Network Next and Network Now. So that is our last information item. Do you have anything to report?
No.
Mr. Carlson? General Manager, no. So with that, this meeting is adjourned.